Publications about velvet worms have been accumulating for 200 years. And in such a small field that grows slowly, this brings a problem. The problem is that if we only check for the literature on the databases, we'll miss nearly half of the significant literature. This is not the case in larger and rapidly changing fields like medicine, where knowledge advances rapidly and all references are not normally needed. In other words, much literature about velvet worms, literature that is still pertinent, has been published in old and non-indexed journals. But how many articles are we actually missing if we only check the databases? This is the question that Jose and myself asked in this little project, and we could answer it because, in this case, there are both digital databases and a good human-collected bibliography for comparison. This is Michael Gisling of the California Academy of Sciences, who kindly shared with us his Onychophora bibliography that covers from the early 19th century, 1826, to 1999. To answer our question, we compare his bibliography with the Web of Science for the same period. We found that the Onychophora bibliography includes 86 articles published until the year 1900, which are missed by the Web of Science. In the second period, from 1900 to 1999, when both sources coexisted, the Onychophora bibliography had 227 articles, and the Web of Science a bit less, 219. However, when we compare the number of articles published year by year, we found that in 49 years, the Onychophora bibliography was more complete, that the Web of Science was more complete in 30 years, and that both databases had the same number of articles in 21 years. Particularly, the Web of Science contains more articles than the Onychophora bibliography after the 1980s. By only checking the Google Scholar, Scopus, or Web of Science databases, researchers studying velvet worms miss alternative viewpoints, novel findings, and diverse data that would improve their own work. To help you recover missing information from the databases, we read the literature published before the 1980s and prepared this summary. In the 1880s, there was a significant output under anatomy, embryology, ecology, geographic distribution, and behavior. Key findings included descriptions of the brain, pharynx, metamerism, leg variation, and habitat preferences. Near the end of the 19th century, detailed studies were added about the functional anatomy of muscles and movements, seminal vesicles, hypodermic impregnation, eggs, hatching, and development of the ova. Any morphological studies that fail to take into account these quality reports from the 19th century would be wasting much valuable information and failing to recognize the significant contributions of all those pioneers. Additionally, there were insightful observations that anticipated much of what was rediscovered in the 21st century about their adhesive secretion. Rare as they are, there was also a note about the rediscovery in the Caribbean. This shows that their apparent rarity is not at all related to reforestation or other human activities, but a real result of both their secretive behavior and low population density. From 1900 to 1930, in-depth work was done on their spermatogenesis, population densities, waste processing, and relationships with millipedes, and the first captive breeding and dietary analysis were also published. The 1930s and 1940s papers center on compared anatomy, embryology, and the few reported parasites. There are also a few reports on Cambrian onychophorans. The 1950 studies analyzed their leukocytes, gland anatomy, brain secretions, respiration, and sperm formation, as well as pharmacological potential, a subject that has been forgotten. The 1960s brought pioneering work on their DNA, electron microscopy, and molting, mostly from Brazil. The 1970s marked increased anatomical and physiological research on the body wall, nerves, muscles, and sensory organs using traditional and also electron microscopy, as well as the poorly studied field of enzymes. As you can see, these topics are far from new and need to be considered by any new research in these fields. Additionally to not searching for valid literature outside the easy option of databases, there are cases of malpractice that we should know about. This is Wyatt Gibbs. His research found that some authors do not cite the work of others not because they ignore their existence, but because they want to appropriate their discoveries and monopolize research funds. The usual victims are researchers in smaller institutions whose work is as good as any but is published in smaller journals. So, our heartfelt recommendation to you, the new generation now taking charge of onychophorology, is that you read all the pertinent literature, judge it by its quality, not by country or journal, and that you always credit what you read. We are just too few, and Onychophorans just too wonderful to do otherwise. Thank you.